The zip ties cut into Sarah's wrists as the fake patrol car disappeared around the corner of Sycamore and Elm. I watched through Mrs. Henderson's security footage 3 hours later. My jaw clenched so tight, I thought my teeth might crack. 2 men in discount tactical gear had just kidnapped my 15-year-old daughter on her way to school. And they had no idea what they'd unleashed. The captain's badge on the taller one read Thorne, Rex Thorne, the self-appointed leader of something called the Willow Creek Community Patrol. His partner, a hulking silent type, had grabbed Sarah with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The white SUV bore no official markings, just a cheap magnetic sign that read, WCCP Security. As I studied the footage frame by frame, noting every detail my Green Beret training had drilled into me, one thought echoed in my mind: these amateurs had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Let me start from the beginning, because understanding how we got here matters. My name is John Walker, and I've spent the last 20 years training America's elite special forces at Fort Bragg. When my wife died 3 years ago, I took early retirement to focus on raising Sarah. We moved to Willow Creek Estates because it seemed safe, a quiet, planned community with good schools and the kind of suburban stability a grieving teenager needed. The house came with a hefty homeowners association fee and a book of regulations thicker than most military manuals. Standard HOA stuff, approved paint colors, lawn maintenance standards, architectural guidelines. I dealt with military bureaucracy my whole career. Civilian bureaucracy seemed manageable. Our property sat on a corner lot with mature oak trees that predated the development by decades. The previous owner, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, had lived there since 1987, 5 years before Willow Creek Estates even existed. When the developers bought the surrounding farmland, they'd incorporated his property into their master plan, but grandfathered his existing structures under something called a non-conforming use permit. I learned about this permit from Frank's son during the closing. The old man had fought the HOA for years over his detached workshop, a sturdy building that violated the association's architectural standards but couldn't be touched due to its legal protected status. The workshop had become my sanctuary, a place to maintain my equipment and teach Sarah practical skills her mother would have called unnecessarily tactical. The first letter from the HOA arrived 2 weeks after we moved in. Standard welcome package. They said, along with my membership certificate came a polite notice that my workshop required architectural review and possible modification to achieve community compliance standards. I filed it with my other paperwork and forgot about it. The second letter arrived a month later, this time from someone named Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, Architectural Review Committee Chairman. The tone had shifted from polite to insistent. My workshop constituted a visual disruption to neighborhood harmony and needed immediate attention. I called the number provided and got voicemail. Mrs. Hendricks would review my concerns and respond appropriately. By the third letter, Mrs. Hendricks had found her voice. Apparently, my failure to respond constituted willful non-compliance with community standards. The workshop must be demolished or modified within 30 days, or I'd face escalating enforcement measures. The signature line now included her full title, Patricia Hendricks, ARC Chairman, Community Standards Enforcement Liaison. I drove to the HOA office that afternoon with Frank Morrison's original permits and a survey showing the workshop's pre-development existence. The receptionist, a nervous woman who wouldn't meet my eyes, said Mrs. Hendricks was in meetings, but would certainly review my documentation. She handed me another form requesting a hearing before the Architectural Review Committee. That hearing, held in the community center's windowless conference room, lasted exactly 12 minutes. Mrs. Hendricks, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, with the kind of power suit that screamed middle management, sat flanked by 2 other committee members who nodded along with her every pronouncement. I presented my documentation clearly and professionally, the same way I'd brief military commanders. Mr. Walker, she said, not looking up from her tablet. These documents may have historical relevance, but they don't supersede current community standards. The Willow Creek Estates Declaration of Covenants, conditions, and restrictions clearly states that all structures must conform to approved architectural guidelines. When I pointed out the legal protection afforded by the non-conforming use permit, she waved dismissively. That's a civil matter between you and previous property owners. Our authority derives from your signed agreement to abide by community standards. The committee voted unanimously to uphold the violation notice. I had 30 days to comply or face daily fines of $100, escalating to $500 after 60 days. As I gathered my documents, Mrs. Hendricks delivered her closing statement. Mr. Walker, we've seen your type before. Military people who think rules don't apply to them. This community has standards, and we will enforce them. I kept my expression neutral, but something cold settled in my chest. 20 years of training soldiers had taught me to recognize dangerous incompetence when I saw it. The escalation began exactly 31 days later. I was having coffee on the back porch when I spotted two men with cameras taking pictures of my workshop. When I approached, they identified themselves as WCCP compliance officers, conducting a routine enforcement documentation process. The taller one wore the same tactical-style uniform I'd later see on Sarah's kidnapper, black cargo pants, utility vest, and a badge that looked like something from a costume shop. Rex Thorne, Captain, Willow Creek Community Patrol, he said, extending his hand with the practiced confidence of someone used to intimidating suburban homeowners. We're here about your non-compliant structure. I didn't take his hand. This is private property. You need to leave. His partner, introduced as Officer Bishop, started circling the workshop with his camera while Thorne kept talking. Actually, Mr. Walker, the CCRs grant the association right of access for compliance inspections. We're acting under HOA authority. Show me that authority. I said, written documentation authorizing this inspection. Thorne's smile tightened. Are you refusing to cooperate with a lawful compliance action? The phrase lawful compliance action told me everything I needed to know. These weren't HOA employees. They were private security contractors, playing at being police. I made a mental note of their vehicle's license plate, and the body camera clipped to Thorne's vest. I'm asking for proper documentation of your authority to be on my property. Bishop finished his photo session and returned to Thorne's side. Got everything. Captain. Multiple angles. Time-stamped. Excellent. Thorne pulled out a tablet and started typing. Mr. Walker, you're being cited for non-compliance with architectural standards, interference with an official inspection, and failure to cooperate with enforcement personnel. That's $300 in combined violations, due within 10 business days. He handed me a printed citation that looked official enough to fool most people. The header read, Willow Creek Community Patrol, Enforcement Division, with an official-looking seal. At the bottom, in small print, authorized by Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association Board Resolution 2023-08. After they left, I called the HOA office. The receptionist had no record of any scheduled inspection. When I asked about the community patrol, she transferred me to Mrs. Hendricks' voicemail. I left a detailed message requesting documentation of the WCCP's authority and legal basis for the citations. Mrs. Hendricks called back the next day. Mr. Walker, the community patrol operates under board authority to maintain community standards. If you have concerns about their procedures, you may request a hearing. What's the legal basis for this patrol? Are they licensed security, bonded, insured? Those are administrative details beyond my purview. The board has authorized enhanced enforcement measures to address persistent compliance issues. The phrase, enhanced enforcement measures, sent another chill down my spine. I'd heard similar language in military briefings when someone was about to do something stupid and dangerous. Over the next month, the WCCP became a regular presence in my neighborhood. I'd spot their white SUV parked at various locations, always with Thorne or Bishop taking photographs. They cited my next-door neighbor for excessive lawn ornamentation, a small garden gnome her grandmother had given her. The family across the street got tagged for unauthorized vehicle storage because their teenage son's motorcycle was visible from the street. Each citation came with the same official-looking documentation and increasingly aggressive language. Failure to comply will result in escalated enforcement measures. Continued violations may trigger alternative resolution procedures. The WCCP is authorized to take all necessary steps to ensure community compliance. I started documenting everything: photos of their vehicles, copies of all citations, recordings of our interactions. My military training had taught me that dangerous people always escalated until someone stopped them. The WCCP was escalating, and Mrs. Hendricks was clearly encouraging them. The breaking point came when I found Sarah crying in her room after school. The WCCP had approached her while she was walking home, demanding to see her authorization to be in the neighborhood. When she explained she lived here, Thorne had taken her photo and told her they'd be monitoring her activities for suspicious behavior. "Dad, they made me feel like a criminal," she said through her tears, "like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood." That night, I called a contact at the FBI field office in Charlotte. Special Agent Mark Olson and I had worked together on joint training exercises when he was military. I explained the situation and asked him to run a background check on Rex Thorne and the WCCP. What Mark found chilled me to the bone. Thorne was a former mall security guard with a history of excessive force complaints. He'd been fired from 3 different positions for harassment and intimidation. The WCCP wasn't licensed, bonded, or insured. They had no legal authority whatsoever. They were private citizens playing dress-up with HOA funding. "John," Mark said over the phone, "these people are setting themselves up for serious federal charges: impersonating law enforcement, unlawful detention, conspiracy to violate civil rights. The question is whether they'll cross that line before someone stops them." I thought about Sarah's tears, about Mrs. Hendricks' smug confidence, about Thorne's escalating threats. "Mark, I think they already have." The morning Sarah disappeared, I was in my workshop reviewing the legal documentation my attorney had prepared. Real documentation this time, not the amateur hour citations the WCCP had been issuing. Milavier, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in property rights cases, had found something interesting in the Willow Creek CC/Rs. "John, this is remarkable," she'd said during our meeting the previous day. "The original development agreement contains a clause that voids all architectural restrictions if the HOA engages in unlawful harassment or intimidation of property owners. It's buried in subsection 15. San T. Probably inserted by a clever attorney representing early buyers. She'd also discovered that Mrs. Hendricks had exceeded her authority by authorizing the WCCP's enforcement activities. The HOA board had never voted on hiring private security, and their insurance explicitly excluded coverage for enforcement actions by unlicensed contractors. "We have them on multiple violations," Jennifer said. "Breach of fiduciary duty, exceeding corporate authority, violations of state licensing requirements, but more importantly, you have grounds to nullify their architectural authority entirely." I was studying these documents when Northwood High's attendance office called to report Sarah absent. My blood ran cold. Sarah had never missed school without telling me. I tracked her phone to the corner of Sycamore and Elm, where the signal had gone dead at 7:58 a.m. Mrs. Henderson answered her door before I finished knocking. "Oh? Mr. Walker, I was hoping you'd come by. I saw something terrible this morning." Her security camera had captured everything. Two men in WCCP uniforms forcing Sarah into their white SUV, zip-tying her hands. The SUV disappearing toward the old maintenance facility at the edge of the development. I called Mark immediately. They took her, I said. Watching the footage loop on Mrs. Henderson's monitor, the WCCP kidnapped my daughter. Jesus Christ. John. We need to move fast. I'm calling in a tactical team. But it'll take time to coordinate with local agencies. Time Sarah might not have. I thought about Thorne's escalating threats. His talk of alternative resolution procedures. These were unstable people with delusions of authority and a 15-year-old girl in their custody. Mark, I'm going to get her out. John, wait for backup. We'll handle this properly. These aren't professionals? Mark, they're amateurs playing with live rounds. If you spook them with a tactical team, they might do something desperate. I hung up and headed for my workshop. 20 years of training elite soldiers had prepared me for exactly this kind of situation. Precision extraction. Minimal force. No room for error. In my secure locker, I selected tools designed for stealth rather than destruction lockpicks. Tactical knife. Ziptia cutters. Night vision scope. I changed into dark clothing and checked my backup phone for GPS coordinates of the maintenance facility. As I drove toward the facility, I thought about what Mrs. Hendricks had said. We've seen your type before. Military people who think rules don't apply to them. She was about to learn what happened when military people decided rules really didn't apply. The maintenance facility sat in a forgotten corner of Willow Creek Estates, hidden behind overgrown landscaping and a rusted chain-link fence. The building itself was a single-story brick structure that looked like a leftover from the area's agricultural past. Perfect place for amateurs to feel important while keeping their activities hidden from the community. I parked half a mile away and approached on foot, using the tree line for concealment. The facility had minimal security, just the kind of overconfidence I'd expect from people playing at being professionals. One man patrolling outside, flashlight beam cutting lazy arcs in the darkness. No cameras. No motion sensors. No backup communication systems. The patrol pattern was predictably amateur. Same route every 12 minutes. Same timing. Same blind spots. I waited through 3 cycles to confirm, then moved during the guard's next circuit. By the time he turned the corner, I was already inside the perimeter. The building layout was simple main office area, storage rooms, and what looked like a converted break room where I could see 2 figures through a grimy window. Sarah wasn't visible, which meant she was likely in one of the back rooms. I neutralized the outside guard first, a quick sleeper hold that dropped him silently. Zip-tied and gagged. He'd wake up with a headache and no permanent damage. The side door lock was cheap hardware store quality. My picks had it open in 30 seconds. Inside, I could hear voices from the break room. Thorne was on the phone with someone, discussing transport arrangements and alternative processing. His partner Bishop was watching television, completely oblivious to my presence 20 feet away. I found Sarah in a small office at the back of the building, zip-tied and scared but unharmed. She nearly cried when she saw me. But I put a finger to my lips and quickly cut her restraints. "Are you hurt?" I whispered. She shook her head. "Just scared. Dad." They kept talking about moving me somewhere else. Something about processing. Not anymore. I handed her my backup phone. "If anything goes wrong, you call 911 and run. Understand?" She nodded, and I could see her mother's strength in her eyes. Bishop went down as quietly as the outside guard. One moment he was laughing at late-night television. The next he was unconscious and secured. Thorne never heard a sound. I found him in what he'd grandly labeled as the command center, a cluttered office with multiple monitors, showing security camera feeds from around the community. Unauthorized surveillance. I noted. Another federal crime to add to his growing list. He was still on the phone when I walked in. No. We can handle the girl. She's a troublemaker. But we have protocols for... He turned and saw me. His face went through a fascinating progression of expressions, confusion, recognition, and finally naked fear. "Who the hell are you?" he managed. "John Walker, Sarah's father." The phone clattered to the floor. Thorne fumbled for the radio on his belt. But I was faster. 20 years of training soldiers to be predators doesn't fade just because you retire. "You took my daughter," I said, my voice controlled and level. "That was a mistake. This is official HOA business." He stammered. "The girl was violating community standards. We have authority." "No," I said, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "You don't." By the time Mark Olson arrived with his tactical team, I was sitting on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunrise paint the sky gold and pink. 3 zip-tied WCCP officers were secured inside, along with enough evidence to fill a federal prosecutor's dreams. "Jesus. John?" Mark said, surveying the scene. "You couldn't wait 20 minutes for backup. My daughter was in danger." I replied, "I handled it." "You certainly did." He looked at the building, then at me. "Find anything interesting?" "Unauthorized surveillance equipment. Unlawful detention facilities. Evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Oh." And Thorne was on the phone, arranging to transport Sarah somewhere else. "Might want to trace that call." Mark's expression hardened. "We'll trace everything. These idiots just handed us a federal case on a silver platter." The arrests made regional news. Fake security company charged with kidnapping teen. Read the Charlotte Observer headline. The investigation that followed unraveled the entire WCCP operation and exposed the rot at the heart of Willow Creek Estate's power structure. Federal agents discovered that Mrs. Hendricks had been funneling HOA funds to Thorne's fake security company without board approval. The WCCP had been conducting illegal surveillance, filing false police reports, and intimidating residents for months. Thorne himself faced federal charges for kidnapping, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The evidence from the maintenance facility was devastating. Computers full of surveillance footage showing the WCCP harassing residents, financial records proving Mrs. Hendricks had embezzled community funds, communications between Hendricks and Thorne discussing ways to remove troublesome elements from the community. During the federal investigation, more victims came forward. The elderly woman cited for lawn ornaments had been harassed for weeks. A disabled veteran had been repeatedly intimidated for parking his modified van in his own driveway. A single mother had been threatened with eviction because her children's toys were visible from the street. Mrs. Hendricks tried to claim ignorance, but the evidence was overwhelming. Federal prosecutors charged her with conspiracy, embezzlement, and civil rights violations. The HOA's insurance company immediately canceled their coverage and sued for fraud. The community meetings that followed were unlike anything Willow Creek had ever seen. Residents who'd been terrorized by the WCCP finally felt safe to speak out. The entire HOA board resigned in disgrace. Mrs. Hendricks' house went up for sale within a week of her arrest. A federal judge dissolved the existing HOA structure and appointed an independent administrator to oversee community affairs. The new board, elected by residents who'd learned the hard way about unchecked authority, implemented strict oversight procedures and transparency requirements. Rex Thorne received 15 years in federal prison. Mrs. Hendricks got 8 years and was ordered to pay full restitution to the community. Bishop and the other WCCP officers received shorter sentences but were banned from any security or enforcement work. Jennifer Walsh helped me file civil suits against all the responsible parties. The settlements were substantial enough to fund Sarah's college education and establish a legal defense fund for future HOA abuse victims. The maintenance facility was converted into a community center with a plaque dedicating it to the protection of residents' rights and freedoms. Sarah suggested the inscription, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." As for my workshop, the new HOA board formally recognized its protected status and issued a letter of apology for the previous administration's harassment. I kept the letter framed on my workbench, right next to the photo of Sarah and me at her high school graduation. Sometimes I think about Mrs. Hendricks' words, military people who think rules don't apply to them. She was wrong. Of course, I believe deeply in rules, real rules, legal rules, rules that protect people instead of oppressing them. What she never understood was that some of us spent years learning to distinguish between legitimate authority and thugs with badges. We learned to recognize when rules become weapons in the wrong hands, and we learned that sometimes protecting what matters most requires precise, decisive action. Sarah never forgot the lesson either. She's studying law now, specializing in civil rights and constitutional protections. She says she wants to help people who face the kind of systematic harassment we experienced. I couldn't be prouder. The WCCP thought they were enforcing community standards. What they actually did was remind an entire neighborhood that freedom isn't free, and some fights are worth having. They picked the wrong family to intimidate, and they learned the hard way that a father's love, combined with professional military training, is a force they never should have tested. Mrs. Hendricks was right about one thing: rules really don't apply to everyone equally. But that's exactly why people like me exist, to make sure the rules apply to people like her.